And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is here Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer James Huff, sitting in the background, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the US. Greetings, gentlemen, and Happy New Year.
Good evening and Happy New Year, everyone. How has the Christmas break been treating you? Did you get some time off?
Yeah, more or less. No, not actually, not really. I mean, I've been traveling quite a lot during this Christmas break into 3 separate countries. It's been quite complicated, but I also had a lot of fun, especially a lot of fun from a linguistic point of view, as I was telling you before the show. I went into Republic of Moldova, and it was very, very funny to see people speaking 2 languages at the same time, which is quite problematic, although I'm afraid to use that word in order to avoid being misinterpreted.
I think the word problematic is also quite problematic, but that's another day.
To be fair, yes. But yeah, other than that, no, I actually got some time off. It's most noticeably on my channel, where it has been quite rather silence in the last 2 weeks. And yeah, it's going to be a very complicated weekend to start catching up with that. Oh yes, and I almost froze to death in Chisinau, Moldova, minus 25 degrees in Celsius during the day. Absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, that sounds rather cold. I wouldn't
want to be... You think? I could barely breathe. So how did you spend the Christmas break?
Yeah, most just at home and just sort of relaxing and actually trying to recover from this cold that I've been having, that I had for like a month now. It's not working. I don't know what's happening. I'm still a bit sick now, but whatever.
Well, maybe it's your immune system, which isn't absolutely fabulous. You should work on that.
Yeah, seems like that.
Although the climate in your area is completely bizarre, it doesn't really make sense to me. With all this climate change thing, it's still mostly the winter is the winter, the summer is the summer. Yeah, sure, the autumn and spring are a little bit confusing, but at least I know what to expect. During the winter it's minus 20, during the summer it's plus 40. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, actually it's been really, really mild this winter. I mean, we've only now, the last couple of days we had some snow, but before there was always just sort of positive degrees or somewhere on freezing. No, it's just like the first snow we actually had this winter was just a couple of days ago.
Yeah, well, it started snowing here around 29 or 30th of December, but it depends on the area. In this part, in the northwest, it's pretty much like you described. In the Far East, it's a serious winter and serious cold, thanks to the wind that the Russians are giving to us, which is the only thing that Russians have consistently given to us. Anyway, enough with the small talk, because we have quite a lot of news to cover. And yeah, I guess I should probably start with this one. It's a follow-up from a piece of news that we presented right before we went in our Christmas break, namely Serbia's attempt to bring in a Duluth model type of domestic violence law within the country. Title is Victory of Blitz, Blitz being the newspaper, New Women's Protection Laws. The offender will be thrown out of the house. Blitz's campaign, Stop Violence Against Women, was fruitful. Starting from next year, that is 2016, it's published in the news in the Christmas Day. Serbian laws will punish offenders far more severely. Up to 34 women were murdered in family feuds in Serbia, and most of them have reported the violence before. Blitz initiated the campaign Stop the Violence Against Women and repeatedly reminded the highest politician that as a society we must recognize this problem as a high priority and start dealing with it. Our struggle was not without results. The Ministry of Justice has formed a work group that is working on altering the criminal law and crafting a new act, a law about organizing state authority to work with partner violence issues. Radomir Ilic, the state secretary in charge of this, states for Bilic that these new legal measures should be implemented in the spring of 2016. Among other things, the alterations of the criminal law come with a completely new type of criminal act, stalking, that includes ceaseless calls and waiting for the victim in front of their place of residence. Indecent offers in the workplace made by superiors will also be treated as sexual harassment. Welcome, France. Anyway, for example, if a subordinate is reporting to the boss every morning and the superior cracks blue humor jokes, it will be treated as sexual harassment. Yep, that's actually worse than France. Family violence will be reformed as violence in partnered relationships. That's a bizarre term. That will, for example, include cases of violence in gay relationships. Okay. Along with alterations of the criminal law, there's also pending a law about organizing the state authority to cope with the new definitions. That law will use the Zurenian model that coordinates every state institutions in fighting violence in partner relationships. Now, they call it the Zurenian model because they discussed it there, and the terms of the law were defined, but it's essentially the Duluth model. The police will, after they receive a report, go out into the field and immediately remove the offender from the home and inform the public prosecutor about the case. Now, it can take 5 to 6 days for a case to reach the prosecutor's desk. That, along with the fact that the offender stayed at home with the victim, was enough for an offender to pressure the victim into withdrawing the charges, beat her again, or do something even scarier. The possibility of this is now gone completely. Afterwards, the police informs the Center for Social Work and the local hospital will be included in the process. Violence in partnerships will be dealt with by specially trained units in every police station, as well as prosecutors in lower courts specialized for such criminal cases. They will go through special training with an emphasis on knowing psychology so they'd know how to approach the victim. This sounds awful. Radomir Ilic, State Secretary in the Ministry of Justice, states that the new law should be put to public debate by the end of January or early February of 2016. The plan is to put the law to be voted in the National Assembly somewhere in March. So in spring, a completely new institutional frame for protection of women will be here. I expect the new system to work like clockwork by September, stated Ilic for the newspaper Blitz. Now, first of all, the comment section is quite populous with people who say this is absolute nonsense and a very bad idea. And one of the commentators brings in a very interesting point. There is nowhere in the law stated some statute of limitations. I mean, yeah, sure, you remove the so-called offender from the home, but for how long? There is no limit in there. Whatsoever, so it can essentially be abused by quote-unquote victims. Let's be honest, it can be used by women to gain free housing, essentially, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Mr. Gunnarsson, comments?
Yeah, I mean, it's this brand new government program. Of course, it's going to work just like clockwork. I mean, we've never seen any sort of new government program have any sort of problems. Obviously, it's just going to run like clockwork. It's a completely reasonable expectation.
Yes, and yeah, and not only that, but I mean, in a way, it's slightly less bad than the Istanbul Convention, which mandates that the prosecutors can just come into any home and press charges, even if the victim withdraws the complaint, or even if there is no victim, just a neighbor said, well, I think my neighbors are fighting, and that's more than enough to tear a family's life apart, regardless of whether there is any substance to that allegation or not. So in that regard, is slightly better, because in here you actually need a very specific complaint. On the other hand, this thing with removing the accused from the house, from the housing unit, without having any sort of due process for that, I think that's very dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. Like, so you can be removed from your own house just based on an accusation.
Yeah, and I mean, under the what is now called in Spain the gender Stalinist regime, back in the days when Ley contra la Violencia de Género was in place, at least then You risked being fined or whatnot, but you could just pay the fine, kick the wife out of the house once you got back, and it had a statute of limitations of 3 days, and then go on with your life more or less okay. It was still bad. But in this case, with no statute of limitations, so basically you can be held off from going into your own property for months and months. I mean, in Serbia, just like in Italy, trials can sometimes take years, even petty trials, like, he cursed me or he committed slander against me in front of a group of people. Even things like that can take years. So it's absurd.
So let's say you have a girlfriend who's living at your house or flat, and she accuses you of domestic violence. Are you then removed from your own house?
Yes, I have to move from my own house, yeah.
That is
And I don't
pretty
know for how
scary.
long, because, for instance, if I would know that, okay, this could take up to 3 months, at least I could do some sort of planning. I could rent another apartment or whatnot. But if you
Yeah.
don't know for how long, I mean, it could be 4 days, it could be 2 years. And you don't know for how long, that's another layer of abuse by the state, because how do you deal with this? I mean, if I know it's 2 years, okay, then I'm gonna cross the mountains back in the other side of the country, and I'll live with my parents and whatnot. But if I know it's 4 days, I definitely do some other arrangements. It's amazingly abusive, and I'm not convinced that the National Assembly will vote if it will stay in this form. On the other hand, from the Russian correspondent, sorry, Serbian correspondents that I have, they've told me that the opposition parties are usually a lot worse in this regard than the current government, with the exception of the Christian conservatives who never gain power. Surprise, surprise. So I don't know. I mean, in a way, it's better than the Istanbul Convention. In other ways, it's a lot worse than what we are familiar with, let's say, in France or in Spain or in Italy.
Yeah, and then of course, at least this article uses gendered language all the time, and of course it's going to be. I don't know if the law itself is actually um, specifically talking about violence against women and so on, or whether it's gender neutral. Do you know that?
For now, we only have preliminary documents, working
Okay.
documents. The law itself hasn't yet been written. Yes, the working documents that I have got the chance to see did use gendered language, so it's pretty much like VAWA type, which is, of course, a different kind of problem, although some other communicates use the gender neutral language, so we don't know yet. Regardless, I mean, I wouldn't want a woman to go through such kind of state abuse either. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
even if it is gender neutral, it's still a stupid law.
Yeah, and of course it's not going to be enforced in a gender neutral way. There's no way it's going to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I don't have the trust either. On the other hand, I have reasons for optimism because, for instance, in Novi Sad, which is a more intellectual, conservative type of city, don't think the policemen in there will going to swallow the feminist psychology special training that the UN representative for Serbia has in mind for them. I don't think those people will actually believe that or enforce it because
Yeah.
as you know from Germany as well, because pretty much everywhere outside of the Anglosphere, the civil law system has this advantage that you can actually have chief of police who said, "No, I'm not going to enforce this. It's retarded." And they can do that pretty much with minor consequences or no consequences at all. That's the good news. But then again, think of it in 10 years, in 15 years, when the current generation will retire. The next generation might actually believe it, especially if they use Croatian learning materials. We know Croatia is essentially the Balkans, Sweden. Amazing. Amazing. I don't know, good luck, Serbia, but it ain't looking good.
Yep.
Okay, let's go to the first one with related straight to the topic in the title.
Okay, this one is from NRW yet. It's called Aufschrei 0.0 or Outcry 0.0, wherein feminist outrage is notably absent. It has been about 3 years since Rainer Brüdele's clumsy old man's pickup line in a hotel bar in January of 2013 triggered a sexism debate in Germany, fueled by the so-called hashtag Aufschrei or outcry on Twitter. So there were ladies. So there be ladies were victims of the FDP, that is the Liberal Party, victims of men, victims of verbal attacks, of offending looks and words. A horrific situation, as women were obviously constantly exposed to the uncontrollable mating behavior and patriarchal fantasies of oppression of heterosexual white men. Now 2 years have passed. On New Year's Eve, events occurred near the Cologne Cathedral and in front of the main station, which I would describe as being completely horrible. So far, more than 30 women have pressed charges, and even the police assume a large number of unreported crimes. A group estimated to consist of 40 to 100 men systematically surrounded young women, groped them, touching their groins, their breasts, lifting their skirts. They called them whores, laughed at them, and in some cases robbed them. According to press reports, a young woman's tights and knickers were yanked down. Another reports feeling alien hands, quote, in all bodily orifices. The same scenes seem to have occurred near the Alter Wartesaal in Cologne. There are similar reports from the Stuttgart train station, albeit not on the same scale as in Cologne. And while one might suppose to be living in a country in which every wrong word and every supposedly wrong look by a man might lead to a feminist hashtag Aufschrei, the feminist net has remained mute in face of the unbelievable things which have happened in Cologne. Aufschrei 2016, more like Aufschrei 0.0. No outcry, nothing. There's a simple reason. The perpetrators don't seem to fit the narrative. According to testimonies by witnesses and victims, the perpetrators were Arabic-looking men. The police say they're looking for men with North African features. Wherever they were, the police have already assembled an investigation force to look into these events. One thing is clear, the perpetrators are men with a migration background. And this seems to be the reason why the feminist net keeps mum. A brief look at Twitter, Emma magazine and Missy magazine, usually guarantors of an acute sense of outrage, shows no reaction. Now, skipping a bit here, one might say, as long as you don't know anything for certain and the perpetrator's identity hasn't been assured, we shouldn't speculate and fuel the wrong kinds of debates. There's two problems with that. If the perpetrators had been, say, German hooligans, we'd already know their first names, the Tagesschau would have reported on it, and the Minister of Justice, Maas, would have created a special commission. No one would have had a problem with revealing the identities of the perpetrators, especially since pillories seem to be making a comeback in Germany. And how in God's name should the police search for perpetrators if it's no longer allowed to describe them? And yes, damn it, it is relevant how someone looks, just like it is relevant which language he speaks, what kind of accent he has, and how old he is. If we want to catch perpetrators, we need to be allowed to describe them. Let's get back to Rainer Brüdele for a moment. A tipsy politician pays a journalist a clumsy compliment. 2 years ago, there was enough to put half the German population under the presumption of being sexist chauvinists. It was enough to demand new laws and codes of conduct. And being a man was enough to be considered on the side of the perpetrators, whether one had done anything objectionable or not. We have become a country in which one can so easily commit a gaffe because a woman or one of the hundreds of genders feels the language should be insufficiently inclusive. We have become a country in which men have to seriously consider whether to enter a lift with a lone woman in it, and where male superiors fear having a private conversation with a female employee for fear of things being misinterpreted. And that's I'm going to read off this article. It's a bit longer than that, but as we said, we have limited time. I also would like to note that this article is a couple of days old, so there's a few new developments here. So for example, it's no longer true that none of the feminists have responded. You know, they since have, of course, written responses and so on.
Most
But
of them completely idiotic and utterly nonsensical, but yes, at least they have reacted. Yeah, we're gonna read a feminist response, just the next article. What I did like about this article is this portion where it says, yeah, if women or whatever other hundreds of genders that are not included because our language is not inclusive, I really like that. That's the kind of thing that I would like to see more often. Um, pretty much everywhere. I mean, whenever there's such a complaint, there should be absolute mockery of that particular complaint. Other than that, yeah, I mean, quite right on point. I mean, they went after that individual. You talked about that incident on this show, if I remember correctly, the 2013 incident
yeah,
that
the
she
Ausschreibung
describes.
thing. Yeah, that was quite a big deal in Germany, and there's a
Hmm.
lot of stupid discussion centered around that.
Yeah,
And
I
it was
think
just
they.
like a completely ridiculous thing. Like there's this politician sitting alone in this hotel bar in the evening, and this journalist comes up to him and is sort of making some rather unflattering comments at him, and then he sort of shoots back and makes this sort of clumsy compliment, and then he's suddenly the bad guy, and I
Yeah,
mean, and this reporter just sat on this for like 9 months or something, until Brudele was becoming, I think, the chairman or whatever of the FDP, and then she sort of brought up this big story. It's completely opportunistic, and it's just the idea that this woman was horribly offended by this is just ridiculous, and it was just stupid from start to finish.
well, you know my position. Even if she had been horribly offended, the answer is so fucking what. Uh, but yeah, I mean, she has a point. The author of this article, Outrage 0.0, very inspired title. She has a point. I mean, the everyone went full Macintosh over ridiculous nonsense back in 2013, and now when it matters a little bit more, uh, it's just mostly silence, or as we'll see in the next article, uh, vague responses, more or less inclined to relativize or to double down on generalized misandry and things of that nature. Uh, that's not consistent. And let's face it, this kind of double standard from the feminist sector has been with us for years and years. It's that ultimate taboo of the feminist sector. Whenever there is anything made by North African or Arabic people, especially if they're women, they're even more silent than when they're men. If the perpetrator is a woman, they're completely silent. If they're men, they try to make them white. They try to obfuscate any kind of motivation that doesn't fit the narrative. This kind of double standard has been with the feminist sector for years and years and years.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I would like to say is that a couple of the foreign articles I've seen on this, things have been blown a bit out of proportion. Like I've seen
Mhm.
one headline that says that 1,000 like 1,000 men participated in this mass rape in Germany or something. No, like there's I think two women who claim to have been raped. Two. That's not another 1,000 rapists. They have,
Yes,
have to keep things in perspective.
yeah, actually, there wasn't 1,000, there were 2,000, according to the Köln police. I've read the report like 3 hours ago, but you're absolutely correct. There is exactly two incidents of rape being claimed. Uh, Other than that, is just admittedly completely petty and dishonorable behavior, but definitely not rape.
Yeah, women being groped and in some cases robbed and so on, which is really bad, but it's not rape.
Yes, it is petty behavior. It's definitely uncivilized and things of that nature, and definitely criminal in the legal sense, but it's not rape. And you're absolutely correct. This kind of headlines that make it imply that there are thousands upon thousands of rapes just within the German borders. And the thing is that there is, however, something that can there is another fact that can actually lead people to relatively wrong conclusions. In exactly the same night, similar incidents have occurred in Kalmar, in Sweden, in Helsinki, in Finland, in Zurich, in Switzerland. So, one has to ask, have they been coordinated? And if not, what triggered them, all of them in the same night? These are fair questions, in my opinion. What is not a fair question is to say, why the hell do we have so many thousands upon thousands of rapists where we don't?
Yeah, I mean it's a really weird thing that for that to happen, and this is really not something that I would have expected to happen or anything like that. I mean,
I did.
Like especially in this sort of in this sort of blatant manner, just like hundreds of people in this particular square, just basically assaulting random women. That's it's not something that I would have expected to happen.
Well, I did, and let me tell you why I did. Again, both the far left and the far right try to make it. The far right tries to make it about genetics, and the far left tries to make it with the bigotry of low expectations. But the fact of the matter is that these people are coming from a culture that is completely different than ours, uh, and yes, in some cases, inferior to ours. And when you import a million just in Germany, just in 1 year, 1,000,000, 100,000, something like that. When you import 1,100,000, the possibility of having 2,000, 3,000, even 10,000 hooligans amongst them is very high. I mean, let's face it, 10,000 is just 0.1% of all of them. But then again, it's enough in numbers to create such a scandal. They're not particularly threatening to the national security of Germany and things of that nature that you see that you can hear in far right circles, but it's enough to create such kind of scandals. And no, I did expect something like that. I didn't expect it to be so coordinated in multiple European cities. And again, I don't know if it is coordinated or not, but it certainly looks so. I did not expect that. But such kind of petty behavior with a few hundred or 1,000 or something at once, yeah, I was just thinking, let's wait for the next public gathering. It surely can happen. I'm not that surprised. I really am not. When you import so many people from a culture that is different, the idea that some of them may be hooligans and may behave completely outside of the bounds of the current culture is not particularly surprising. It's the law of big numbers. Statistically speaking, the likelihood of having 0.1% being hooligans, come on, it's very likely.
Yeah, but so many hooligans just in Cologne that and it seems to be some kind of organized thing. Like
yes,
it seems hard to imagine that just hundreds of migrants just happen to turn up at this one square and just happen to just start groping women and robbing them and so on.
Absolutely. That's why I'm not excluding the possibility of coordination. It's just a bit too coordinated to be just a coincidence.
Yeah, I don't know if they coordinate this with other groups in other countries or whatever, but definitely the thing in Cologne seems to be some kind of coordinated effort by whomever. And it just seems hard to imagine what they're trying to achieve with it, whoever they are.
Yeah, it doesn't really help anyone. It doesn't help the pro-immigrationist agenda. It doesn't really.
Certainly not.
Yeah, it doesn't help even the anti-immigrationist agenda because the crimes aren't really that serious. And at the end of the day, the pro-immigrationists can say, well, at the end of the day, most of the crimes committed are petty, dishonorable but petty. And yes, there are 2 or 3 serious crimes, but then again, 2 or 3 serious crimes in a big city in one day, it's not particularly spectacular. So, I mean, it doesn't really help anyone. It just seems completely pointless if it is indeed coordinated.
I've even heard the claim from some people on the left that this was a false flag attack. That this
I don't think so.
this was an effort to sort of undermine the the cause of letting in refugees and with the swing public opinion to expel everyone. But that seems rather far-fetched to me. And
Not only it
these
seems
sort of big
far-fetched,
conspiracies are difficult
not
to
o-
pull off.
yeah, not only it seems far-fetched, but let's think, how would this work? I mean, look, I am against mass immigration of this type. I really am. But I'm thinking of how would I do it if I want to stage a false flag operation like that. I mean, I don't like to have so many people of very different culture coming in all at once, uncontrolled and unchecked and whatnot. How would I go? I would just go to the camps and try to make friends with the most hooliganish of them to convince them to come all of them into one square and do what I want them to do. How would that work? I don't think that. No, it doesn't work like that. I mean, if I wanted to organize a false flag operation, I wouldn't organize it like this because I couldn't, and nobody could in this fashion with these purposes. I mean, there is a lot of elements of hazard there.
Yeah, at least not without being detected. Like, of course, you could go in
Absolutely.
and offer lots of money to lots of people, and then you can get them to do these kinds of things, no problem. But you need some sort of pretty big organization offering lots of money to lots of people, and
Yeah, I mean
doing that
that
without being discovered in any way. That
to
seems
pay
far-fetched.
this, you need what, 100,000 euros at best, at the very least, and it's not clear what you gain for that money. I mean, no, it's just too ridiculous. The proposition itself is too ridiculous. But anyway, going further with on the same topic, coming from Sweden, Nyheter idag. After the sexual attacks in Köln, an appeal amongst Swedish journalists calls upon white men. Of course they do. After the New Year weekend sexual attacks in Köln, several Swedish journalists took it on Twitter and call upon the white men. One of them is Sydsvenskan journalist Sophie Dahlsted, who claims to have been sexually harassed by a white man as late as during the day today, that will be January 6th. But when Nyheter idag called her, she suddenly does not want to answer question. Wait, is Nyheter idag some sort of news media, she asked? Then the article goes on and gives the background story on Köln, while skipping that. With the occasion of the story of New Year night sexual attacks in Köln being treated in great detail in the Swedish press, this same afternoon, Expressen journalist Irena Pozar took it to Twitter to offer further perspective upon the story with an appeal. But the appeal is not directed against the Arab or North African offenders, but against the white men. Hands up anyone who has ever been sexually assaulted by a white man, writes Polzar on Twitter. Several Swedish journalists and politicians have responded to the appeal and claimed to have been the victims of sexual harassment perpetrated against them by a white man. One of them is the Liberals' LGBT chair, Maria Jern. Another who responded to the call is Sydsvenskan journalist Sophie Dahlsted, who claims she as late as during the day today has been subjected to sexual harassment by a white man. When Nyheter idag called her up to ask if it is really true and if it is something she has been subjected by her fellow journalists at work, she does not want to answer question. Wait, what's Nyheter idag? Is some kind of news media? She asks. Yes, we are a liberal conservative magazine. Oh, no, I don't talk to you. And then she puts down the receiver. When we call again to ask if she would like to read her quotes before publication, she points out that she's off for the day. Dahlsted has now removed the claim from Twitter about her alleged sex attack she suffered during the day at the hands of white men. It is unclear why she removed the post. Now there's an update there. Sophie Dahl, after the publication of this article, has been in touch with us via email in which she writes that she calls harassment by white men the fact that she sometimes gets nasty email in her capacity as a columnist. Here she writes, and this is a direct quote from her email, quote, "When I write, I am being harassed by white men, and I have been as late as today, and I refer to that as unpleasant and threatening emails I get as a columnist from all sorts of different men." Now, I don't really Google their picture or to see their skin color, but they tend to be mostly gentlemen named, for example, Ulf or Bengt. End of quote.
It seems like a really racist assumption to me.
Yes, that's one aspect of the story. Yes, so A bunch of immigrants commit several crimes, most of them petty, one or two of them probably more serious, in a foreign country. And our analysis as a publication, as Sydsvenskan, is let's wound up another circle jerk of hatred against white Swedish men who have no connection whatsoever to the story. Am I the only one who thinks this is absolutely retarded?
No.
I mean, seriously? And this has been mostly the reaction in the Swedish feminist sector. I mean, once the story broke out, what happened in Köln, I was like, yes, I have to stay connected to the Swedish media because something stupid must come up. It just has to. And you know, the hardcore feminist venues such as Lady Dahmer published an article that's almost impossible to translate into English. I mean, it contains so much newspeak that it's very hard to translate it, but it's pretty much boils down to it's the white man's fault.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what the facts are. It's still a white man's fault.
Absolutely, yes. And then there is, I didn't include it in this news section because we don't have time to read that much. Then there's Feminist Current, the very mainstream and forward-thinking and influential feminist publication, Feminist Current, who, as a response to the Köln attacks, they said that it's probably a time to impose a curfew on all men. It makes perfect sense, absolutely.
Yeah, except it doesn't. Hey, here's an idea where we don't just impose a curfew on all women. That makes about as much sense.
Yeah, and it would definitely be that's what I was discussing with someone. I mean, it would make a lot more sense because you know there is some chance of some men breaking the curfew and thus putting the safety of the women in public in danger. However, if we impose a curfew on all women, which is easier to enforce, then definitely all women will be safer.
Yeah, and it's for their own good. So
yeah, it's for the greater good. yeah. You know, for instance, in the Feminist Current article, it's also something like, well, if there were asylum seeker among the perpetrators, now, to be fair, they didn't know at the time, that is far from a reason to place all refugees under general suspicion. Okay, but then one paragraph later, and also in the headline, it does make sense to cast suspicion on all men of all nations everywhere on Earth. It's absolutely impeccable. I mean, come on, this is impeccable logic. You can't argue with this. You just laugh.
Let's not generalize, but let's generalize about this particular group.
yeah, let's not generalize about this small group. Let's generalize about 3.54 billion people on Earth because it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Actually, I've just come up with another explanation, which probably someone has already offered, but I have another explanation for why it's actually white men's fault. Because you see, a lot of these migrants are very, very poor, and we all know that crime is linked with poverty. So the reason they committed this crime is that they're poor, and the reason they're poor is because of white men, because of colonialism. QED.
Yeah, seems legit. I mean, we all remember the German colonial empire in Afghanistan and in Syria. I mean, there was, you know, the Syrian Bundesrepublik. We know that existed. Oh, wait. No. no. yeah. I really like it when I hear this colonialism argument in relation to violence occurring in Finland, and I'm like, seriously? I mean, even Sweden had some sort of colonial empire. I mean, they had like 2 islands in the Caribbean, so, you know, it counts. But Finland, I mean, Finland was wiped out of the map multiple times in the last 200 years. Where the hell is that Finnish colonialism that you're all talking about? And believe it or
not. But Finns are white, so that counts. I mean,
yes,
they're not even, you know, Indo-European and so on, but who cares? Who cares about these small details?
Yeah, but again, they didn't have any colonial empire, like, at all.
Yeah, but they look kind of similar to the people who did have the colonial empire, so... So
Yeah,
there.
and their second official language is Swedish, and Sweden had two islands in the Caribbean, so yeah, I guess it counts. Ah, anyway, let's go slightly towards the silly place. We don't usually cover these kinds of pop culture things, but this one is just too silly not to. Coming from the BBC, French Comics Festival marred by sexism row. A prestigious award for graphic novelists in France is facing calls for a boycott after its long list of nominees failed to include any women. Listen to the language. It failed to include any women, as if that would have been mandatory or something. The 42-year-old Grand Prix at Angoulême has long faced criticism for its failure to recognize women cartoonists. This year, a pressure group is calling for a boycott, saying it is no longer tolerable that the renowned female creators are left off the list of 30. At least 3 male nominees have publicly backed the protests. They have asked for their names to be removed from the list. The Grand Prix is a highly prestigious prize recognizing the lifetime achievement of a cartoonist. It is handed out each year at the Angoulême International Comics Festival. In its long history, only one woman, Florence Sestac, has ever won the prize. A group called BD Égalité, or Women in Comics Collective Against Sexism, gotta love the French names, said the prize was significant because as well as being honorary, it could also boost an artist's career and book sales. What is the message sent to women cartoonists and those in the process of becoming such? It asked on its website. We are discouraged from having ambition, from continuing our efforts. How could we take it otherwise? It all comes back to the disastrous glass ceiling. We're tolerated but never allowed top billing. Will we require women in comics to perpetually play second fiddle? A number of cartoonists on the long list have since asked for their names to be removed. It's ridiculous. It's embarrassing. American Daniel Close called it a now totally meaningless honor. What a ridiculous, embarrassing debacle, he added. Riyad Satouf on Facebook listed a number of female cartoonists he would prefer to cede my place to, including Rumiko Takahashi, Julie Doucet, Anouk Ricard, Marianne Strapi, and Catherine Meurice. The festival's Frank Bondou was quoted in French media as saying that Franco-Belgian graphic novels, known as bande dessinée, had traditionally been dominated by men. The festival cannot distort this reality, although I do concede that the list might contain 1 or 2 female names, he said. But he rejected accusations that the festival ignored the contribution of women artists, giving examples of steps it was taking to promote their work.
Now I know very little about comics or French comics in particular. But
Apparently, this is a global.
I do know a couple of French comics that are drawn by men. I don't know any drawn by women. So
Yeah, same here. I don't know. I know exactly 0 French comics drawn by women. Maybe they do. I mean, I'm sure they do exist, but they're probably so important that we rarely get to see them outside of France. On the other hand, this particular festival is more or less global. I mean, it's pretty much like Oscar, which is technically American but not really. Or the BAFTA Awards, or the Berlin Movie Festival, which is technically German but not exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's more or less a global award. And look at the list of females they proposed. I mean, one of them is Japanese, another one is Italian, and one of them is of Serbian descent. Yes, I know I'm being stereotypical here, but come on. Um, so it's pretty much a global award. That being said, though, this idea that the festival failed to include, as if it was
yeah,
somehow
when I
expected.
just tried didn't include. That is a perfectly good phrasing. Why do you have to say failed to include?
Yes, yeah, it just didn't include, or none of the women made it to the final list. I mean, it happens. And also, let's put it this way: art is art, and you cannot have a perfectly objective competition here. There is some dose of bias. I mean, can we declare if Avatar and Titanic are which of them is better? Well, then, objectively, not really. I mean, yes, when there is an award for technical effects, yeah, we can all recognize that Avatar is better. But when we talk about some sort of artistic value, there's no way to assess that objectively.
Yeah, though I guess you could say that that's sort of the point because it is subjective, and therefore these kind of biases do creep in, and that's why women are not on the list. That's what you could say.
Okay, fair enough. Then let them have their own festival. I mean, seriously. I mean, if you're convinced and you have evidence and whatnot that the festival is biased against you, okay, fair enough. Let's suppose that's the case. So what? Make your own festival. And just like it happened with the Comic Con franchise, which is now split into like three worldwide, because the Asians thought it was biased in favor of Europe and North America, so they created their own Comic Con franchise, which is called the same, it works the same, but it's led by other people that can have their own conference. And then there is the Comic Con Budapest, which is another franchise that holds more often and more diverse conferences in Eastern Europe than the one based in London and whatnot. I mean, I'm sure you can do the same with these kinds of prizes.
Yeah, but there would be a lot of work. It's much easier to complain.
Fair enough. Absolutely fair enough. I can't argue with that. Okay, let's get to the more complaining. Oh, actually, no, this is a bitch slap. Go ahead.
Okay, this one is from Spectator from the UK. I hate to break it to feminists, but white male privilege is a myth. How's this for dark irony? Throughout 2015, white male privilege was the buzz phrase on every red tweeter's and liberal hack's lips, as they fumed against the easy, pampered lives allegedly enjoyed by human beings who had the fortune to be born with a penis and a pale skin. Railing against white men and their cushy existences has become the stock in trade of many feminists. Yet towards the end of 2015, it was revealed that there's a social group in Britain more derided and less successful than pretty much every other social group. Guess who? Yep, young white men, especially young working-class white men. A large sector of the group that the new identity politics mob loves to ridicule for sailing through life unmolested and unchallenged is actually having a rough time. Consider this. 18-year-old women are 35% more likely to attend university than 18-year-old men. And where 37% of black school leavers go to university, only 28% of white school leavers do. These stats were unveiled by UCAS in December, leading its chief executive to wonder if it isn't time to initiate outreach projects designed to get more white blokes into college. Also in December, a YouGov analysis of 48 surveys of public attitudes found that young white men are viewed as, quote, the worst ethnic, gender and age group, unquote. They are the most derided ethnic group in Britain. YouGov's number crunchers confessed by being surprised by the lousy reputation of young white men, who are seen as drunken, promiscuous, prone to drug-taking, work-shy, and impolite, even as other surveys reveal that today's youth actually drink less and do fewer drugs than earlier generations did. What's more, young women now earn more than young men, 1,111 a year more to be precise. Between the ages of 22 and 29, women in general, covering all races, out-earn guys. By the time women hit their 30s, however, their pay falls below men's. Those young opinionated new media feminists who get handsome advances to write books spluttering about white male privilege are far more privileged than many of the white males they splutter about, especially the ones who empty their bins or sweep their roads. It's almost Orwellian in its topsy-turviness. The most well-connected middle-class women denouncing the alleged privileges of some of the most derided people in society. Partly this is just bad science. Feminists, leftists and others see the parliament and the boardroom still have a hefty number of white men in them, and they extrapolate from this to argue that all white men must have lovely lives. Hence they always use the ridiculous sweeping terms white men or white privilege, as if whiteness and maleness were inherently beneficial, as if loads of white men aren't dirt poor and awfully underprivileged. It's like seeing the Queen and thinking, wow, white women in Britain have it good, don't they? But there's something else going on too, something more pernicious. The way the politics of identity elbows aside anything to do with class. Unlike radicals of old, the new identitarians, from feminists to shouty students, do not see the world in terms of the haves and have-nots, or the ruling class and the working class, in terms of work or wealth or clout. No, to them it's all about ideology, race, gender, fixed traits which they think define us as individuals and determine our destinies. Such ugly racial determinism is why they can use the blanket dehumanizing term white people to refer to a vast group that contains all sorts of social classes and people: rich, poor, middling, left, right, good, bad, happy, sad, etc. The idea that all white men have a certain kind of life or outlook is as dumb and foul as saying all blacks are criminals. Identity politics doesn't totally smother class considerations, however. It helps to facilitate a new PC version of class hatred. The bile spat by feminists and others at certain white men, the uncouth, most derided ones, is really old-fashioned loathing for the lower orders, dolled up as a radical stand against male privilege. When university students are media-based identity obsessives crow about drinking white male tears, they behave like modern-day Marie Antoinettes, laughing in the face of the less fortunate will never experience the privileges enjoyed by these fashionable railers against privilege. White male privilege is simply a myth.
Uh-oh. Butt hurting coming. 3, 2. Yeah, I always like when Brandon O'Neill writes about these social issues. It's almost always this kind of old-style British snarkiness that you don't really see in commentary written by younger writers. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard to argue against with anything he said. I mean, we have covered the story where it said that young white men are the most derided group.
Yes.
In Britain, and we know that's pretty much the case. And yes, I have read. I don't think we ever covered it on this show, but I have read the report that he quotes at the beginning, where it said that essentially young white men have probably the worst fate, at least in education, in Britain right now. All of that is true, and considering that, speaking about generalized white male privilege sounds like I don't know, sounds like feminists are living on another planet, or definitely in another country, not in Britain.
Yeah, I mean, what he's talking about here, how these feminist women can earn these high advances for their books and have these cushy jobs and so on, ranting about white men. You know, of course, if white men were actually as privileged as they say, then they would not be getting all these accolades for denouncing them. It's, I mean,
the patriarchy would have shut down that operation long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of pretending that they're fighting the establishment, but they are the establishment.
They are the establishment, yes, absolutely. I mean, think about it this way. Jessica Valenti, for writing one of her absolutely haram columns that she writes on The Guardian, and we sometimes read in here for shits and giggles. Just for writing one column, she charges something like $500. Now, there are a lot of people in Europe who, both in the Eastern Europe and Western Europe, or Southern Italy for that matter, who work like 2 weeks and hard work, very complicated work, to make $500. So, I mean, if there is such a generalized white male privilege, then how come it's usually women, usually white, usually feminists who make quite a lot of money by doing very little productive work? Either by selling books or by writing these kinds of columns. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's also worth emphasizing what this author has written here. How it's how you shouldn't treat these groups as some monolithic entity. Even if it were true that white men are privileged, that doesn't mean that all white men are privileged. If we see that that by some measure, on average, white men do indeed have advantages that people are biased in their favor or whatever. That doesn't mean that this is true for all white men. It just might just be true for some subset of them, and having some sort of policy that in some way punishes white men in general means that that those white men who continue to succeed are the ones who are actually favored, and those who were not favored before will be unfairly punished then. And similarly, it works in reverse when you have some disfavored group and you have some sort of a policy that you hire these people preferentially and so on. Then the people who will get the cushy jobs and so on are not the people in that group who are actually badly off for the most part. It's the people who
would have succeeded anyway.
Yeah, basically that, like for, something like that doesn't actually exist in Germany, but suppose we have some sort of affirmative action for people with a migration background, as they say. Then the people who benefit from that would be people like me. Like, I do have a migration background. My father's a foreigner, so that gives me a migration background. But I grew up in Germany. I've lived all my life here. I don't feel like I have any sort of disadvantage from having one parent who isn't German. I think if anything, it's actually been an advantage for me. But still, I would be favored by such a policy, and that doesn't make any sense.
Yes. Somewhere in the Thomas Sowell books, I think in Black Rednecks and White Liberals, but I could be wrong. In one of his books, he was providing evidence of how affirmative action tends to work, and it's usually the daughter of the black prosecutor, black career prosecutor in a U.S. state gets affirmative action to be admitted into Harvard. I mean, the daughter of that prosecutor is wealthy enough to study by herself and would have been admitted to Harvard anyway, but she gets admitted even she's now 100% sure to be admitted because she's a black female and therefore part of the oppressed. And that's how it usually works. In here there is mandated by the European Union that we pay for affirmative action for gypsies. So now we see the children of the wealthiest gypsies that have ever lived. They're now admitted into the top schools without providing an exam because they're oppressed minorities. And whilst the real poor people in those particular groups that supposedly the state wanted to help don't really get to any change whatsoever. They don't get better treated or worse treated. They're just same as before. And that's how it usually works when such policies are being enacted.
Yeah, and basically, as long as a group is genuinely oppressed, then it's almost impossible to actually get a law in place that favors that group. That's not how it works.
Yes.
If a group is despised by the population, then if anything, you get a law that punishes that group even further.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the very fact that such laws exist pretty much proves that there is no oppression. But
that's a bit of a too strong statement, because you can have a situation where some people hate a particular group but the majority don't, or something like that.
Yeah, but that's not a piece of oppression. That's pockets of prejudice at best, but it's not evidence of oppression. If there is a generalized, general majority of people who approve of the existence of such laws. It pretty much works the other way around. During the Jim Crow period, it was the Jim Crow laws, which is a strong indication that there were individuals who were not willing to practice segregation, were not willing to practice the separate but equal nonsense and whatnot, and that's why you have a law. But that doesn't mean that there was no racism. It just means that there were pockets within the society that did not want to practice such thing, and they had to be mandated by the government.
Yeah, I mean, from a business's perspective, discrimination usually is not a good idea. That's why if you want to have this sort of really widespread spread discrimination, you actually have to have laws to enforce it. I mean, you will get some particular pockets of prejudice and discrimination, some particular people who have some sort of irrational hatred for some particular group. You'll always get that, but it's going to be isolated incidents that don't really matter too much in the grander
Yeah,
scheme of things.
for most businesses is actually a very bad idea. I mean, uh, I guess it makes sense to have one bar or one restaurant or whatnot that doesn't receive one particular group, and have that restaurant have as a selling point the fact that this restaurant is free from whatever group that is despised at the moment. But to have that generalized, that doesn't make sense in a free market, because there's always the incentive for someone else to come in and say, wait a minute, I can get a lot of clients that are essentially guaranteed now because they're not received anywhere else. So yeah, from a business perspective, it definitely doesn't make sense. But at the end of the day, these kinds of discussions pretty much reduce to individualism versus collectivism. If you're really believing, and that's what Brendan O'Neill says, if you believe that biology and fixed traits define everyone as individuals and determine their destinies, then you're bound to think in collectivistic terms. Actually, I think this biology-oriented thinking, it is derived from the collectivistic thinking, but whatever, it's a chicken and egg discussion on that. But as long as you think as people as individuals, you're not really bound to practice the kind of prejudice that our philosophical opponents pretend to rally against.
I mean, sure, these groups exist, and race groups, language groups, nationality groups, and so on. They are important in many ways. They color our thinking and so on. But at the end of the day, the sort of differences within groups are usually much bigger than the differences between the averages of the group, and
that's true sometimes. For instance, with men and women, there is more differences within men than within women, for instance. But there is also huge differences between men and women. So it's not really that clear cut.
Yes, but I did say usually. I mean, of course, it depends on what kinds of groups you're looking. Like if the one group you're looking at is I don't know, human beings, and the other group is paper clips, then yeah, the difference between the groups are pretty large in that case. But if you say looking at say Europeans and North Africans and so or something like that, then there's a lot more similarities there than between humans and paper clips.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, let's go to the Huffington Post. This so sounds legit.
It's actually really legit. It's from the German Huffington Post.
Yep.
And this translating this was a bitch. Like, it was really and some parts are just untranslatable. But this article, and I'm just going to do my best to translate some of these terms. Like it's just some specific German terms that where I'm just going to provide you some sort of direct translation that sort of conveys some of the meaning of the German term. But anyway, this article is called "This article is going to offend you," and that's a good thing. It's a polemic written by Roswitha Müller-Schenkenbrink, who's the editor-in-chief at Psychologie Aktuell. When my children wanted a Negro kiss, which is sort of a German confection, it's something like a chocolate-covered marshmallow, except it's not really a marshmallow. It's more something made of egg white and sugar or something, covered in chocolate. So it's as this sort of it's called in German, it's called a Negerkuss. So it's something like Negro kiss, which is a kind of interesting name. Of course, not exactly politically correct, but that's sort of the point. So when my children wanted a Negro kiss after their gypsy schnitzel, which is a kind of schnitzel with like particular sauce, then that is what they got, even if it was made entirely of sugar. And after we were done, I would call for the waitress, who was a good girl and brought me the check. At home, My char lady kept things in order, our neighbor's child was slightly retarded, and the gentleman next door was a somewhat odd Greek. A perfectly nice gentleman, but odd. Today I would be crucified over this choice of words, and not by some strangers from different religions, but by the constantly concerned defenders of humanity and decency. But would it be better if my children ate a chocolate-covered marshmallow treat with stevia after they had eaten their schnitzel in the way of the traveling people, if the gastronomical service person brought me the check, my room attendant performed a socially degrading form of labor, and my neighbors are a German with migration background of indeterminate gender and a differently abled child? In God's name, have we all gone mad? I'm 73 years old now, and editor-in-chief of an enlightened, cosmopolitan, I would even say radically liberal, publishing house. But as long as I'm in charge here, we will use the generic masculine, and I won't stand for any artificial, politically correct language. Handicapped people aren't differently abled. They're handicapped, just as I am, with a degree of handicap of 30, which is a sort of government-issued system which determines what kind of parking spaces you get and whatever. So it's like 100 is, I think, the maximum that you can be that's like completely handicapped. So I am, just as I am, with a degree of handicap of 30 because of my bad hips. That's quite normal at my age. Yes, I am an handicapped old lady, a devout Christian. I have a lesbian daughter and a brave son who's serving his country as a professional soldier. And my husband is a cripple. Yes, really. Since his accident, he limps like a ship in a stormy sea. Can you imagine that? And I lead this editorial office, which is proud to be one of the most cosmopolitan troops, yes, I really did write troops, in psychology journalism. Skipping a few paragraphs here. Of course, we should treat everyone with respect. Every person deserves dignity. But my husband doesn't stop being a cripple if you call him orthopedically unique. This linguistic tampering by professional moralists who constantly annoy people instead of doing something productive with their time has got to stop, so that we can once again speak plainly, with respect, but in line with the facts, rather than in world-twisting monstrosities, where things can no longer be called by their proper names, where things can no longer be called by their proper names, where is enlightenment supposed to come from? Think about it. And now you may begin your shitstorm. You know what? I don't care. I am old and my career is coming to an end. I don't care what you think of me. And the best thing is, I'm right. And I know that the silent majority is on my side.
That's too bad you didn't read it in its entirety. One question, why is it bad to say troops? I googled that and I haven't figured out why it's bad to say troops.
I don't know particularly. Some of these words I wouldn't really consider politically incorrect. That she sort of puts in italics to sort of mark that these are, bad think words. But truppe, I mean, it's sort of militaristic and so on. So
yes,
I don't know.
Yes, I know what the word means, but I don't know why it's bad to say it. Why it's bad to call to. I mean, what the equivalent would be? What, crew? Why is bad? That's what I wasn't able to understand. It's the portion
I'm not entirely sure either, because it's sort of contrast of militaristic images. I don't know.
It sounds like overly sensitive. Still, the orthopedically unique.
Yeah, I really liked that one. That was great.
Yes, and the differently abled. With the thing with the handicap. I'm going to share you a story. I worked in the social services as part of an extra governmental agency, a non-governmental organization that could perform governmental services. It was a period when the Romanian government was trying to externalize as much as possible to community services. It was a very good period. It technically it still works, but fewer people are interested now. And when I started working, handicapped people were named legally handicapped people because they were, yes, handicapped, and the crippled were crippled and whatnot. And then the politically correct language started hitting in, and now you can actually get fined if you refer to a handicapped person as a handicap in an official setting sponsored by the state. You have to say person with disabilities, which in Romanian sounds very complicated and it's hard to pronounce. And since I was not part of the government, I could actually continue to use the old language, much to the dismay of the, as this author is calling them, the public moralists who are busy with doing petty nonsense instead of doing something productive with their time. And I never understood this. I mean, that was exactly my argument, like 12, 13 years ago. And like, do these people become healthier if we call them persons with disabilities as opposed to handicapped?
Yeah, and I mean, handicap is not. It's not.
And it's not a slur at the end of the day.
It's just
It's a descriptive term.
It's a descriptive term, yeah, and I mean, I guess it's a sort of euphemism treadmill where once upon a time we called people idiots, and then we came up with this nice euphemism and called them mentally retarded. It's this sort of nice euphemism. They're not stupid. They're just sort of a bit slow. It's this really nice euphemism, but even that has become extremely offensive now.
No, mentally retarded is completely offensive now. I don't know what the correct euphemism is, and I don't care to know, but I know that mentally retarded is now considered a slur. Not that I care. But yeah, I mean, and for instance, I wear glasses. Now it's no longer a secret since I have a YouTube channel and I wear glasses all the time. And I've been wearing glasses since '93. So, it's 23 years now since I've been wearing glasses. And I'll probably wear glasses till the end of my life because, I have an inherited disease at the eyes. I had no choice in that. It just happened, and life is tough. And,
So you're ophthalmological, or however you pronounce that word, unique?
Ophthalmologically unique. Well, I'm actually close to unique. I mean, the disorder that I have is not really prevalent. Something like 0.5% of the global population is affected. So I'm quite a special snowflake in that regard. But moving further, at first, when I first got the first paper to recommend me wearing glasses, at that time the system was still quite centralized. Then the private clinics emerged, and there was no longer a need for that. But at first, you actually had to take some approval from the National Agency of Blind People. That's how it was called. And then I lost the count for that. Then the private clinics emerged, and I didn't need the state at all. But then I learned 3 years ago that now it's half privatized, and it's called the National Association with People with the Sight Challenge, and whatever, it has another word. And I'm like, why? I mean, with the Sight Challenge, and seriously? And 90% of their members are actually blind. I mean, they don't see at all. Now I can understand partially blind or with an eye disorder, but with sight problems, and again in Romanian it sounds even worse than it sounds translated into English. And I've always wondered why. I mean, I'm not offended if someone tells me that I'm blind. I'm like, well, no, I'm not totally blind, at least not yet. And that's pretty much it. I mean, why would you be offended by a descriptive term? There you go. National Center for Visually Impaired, says CYR. I don't think it's called like that in here. Sorry, it's lacking the term in English now, how to translate the Romanian word. But yeah, pretty much like that. I mean, these kinds of euphemisms, I'm never able to understand them. I think George Carlin had a sketch about that when he was describing how we all evolved from shell shock to post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, which you can now get from Twitter.
Which you can now get from Twitter. Yeah. Amazing. But I mean, go ahead, please.
I mean, some of these euphemisms kind of make sense, like one of the things that they mentioned at the start here, the Zigeuner Schnitzel or something like a gypsy schnitzel. I mean, the German term Zigeuner is sort of etymologically sort of suspect because it translated literally it means something like I know, traveling rogues or something like that. So that being called that is not, I guess, particularly nice. So
Yeah, but it's nicer to call them the schnitzel of the traveling people of the traveling
Yeah,
way.
that was of course a joke. Um, the sort of proper politically correct term is paprika schnitzel, which is an even more descriptive term. So I have no problem with that one.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, with the notable exception of the of the English language, where they're called gypsies, gypsies are Tsigan or Tsigoine or Tsiganyok or something like that all over Europe, from the far east of Russia, where it's Tsigan, from the far south of Italy, where it's Tsingaro. And I don't think that's bad. I mean, that's the etymology of the word in German as well. I mean, it's a descriptive term of a group of people. And it's the descriptive term that's been around for at least 500 years, probably more. Why change it, given that the people that it describes them, most of them have no issue with that? Now, sure, some of them do, as after going through leftist universities, but that's a different story.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, here in this case, it's actually going to a more descriptive term, so I don't really have much of a problem with that.
Okay, fair enough.
Um, the thing is, but I sort of like the Negerkuss. I think that's a really nice term, and calling it just a Schaumkuss or Schokokuss or something, that's quite boring.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, at least the first definition one can understand even without speaking German.
yeah, but I mean, that's also one of these words where there's this sort of euphemism, this sort of constant series of euphemisms where now the word Negro, which used to be just a completely accepted, normal, neutral term, I mean, it's a term that, say, Martin Luther King used without any sort of
Yes.
without anyone raising an eyebrow or something. But now
Hmm.
that's sort of considered taboo, and that's sort of considered an insult or something. And
Yeah.
it's the same with the German word Neger, which is basically the equivalent of Negro.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, in Romanian, black is negru. So, whether I want it or not, I sometimes say negro when I speak in English because it makes sense to me.
Yeah, but it's just the Latin roots just for black.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, and not to mention that when I started learning English, negro was still acceptable, and so I mean, I don't want, and it's really my stubbornness. I don't want to relearn languages once in 10 years. I just don't. Although I have to do that in Swedish because they're progressing so fast that if you're stopping using Swedish for 5 years, then you start reading the press again on social issues. You have very little chance of actually understanding what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not particularly old, but when I was a child, everyone said Negerkuss. That's just what people call the thing. No one said, Schaumkuss or something like that, or Schokokuss or anything like that. I mean, even back then, sort of the official name for this product was something different, something not containing the term Neger or Mohrenkopf, which is also a term that's used in parts of Germany. It's some basically like moose head um, for the same thing. Um, but basically now you don't really hear the term Negerkuss anymore. That's just something that's just disappeared over the last 20 years or something.
Yeah, I hate it when this happens, and this is probably one of my privileges living in an area where the language is actually conservatively enforced. Very few words have been changed in the last 25 years. Some old-time mistakes have now been accepted as a correct way to express yourself. Some things that I would consider grammar mistakes are now somehow accepted for some reason, most of them retarded reasons, but whatever. But changing the words is not really popular in this area of the old continent, and that's probably one of the good things in here. But yeah, I mean, this kind. I mean, yeah, sure, language is organic and it changes over time and whatnot. But what I don't like is when it changes for reasons that don't make expression easier or more straightforward. On the contrary, they make it worse. They make it harder.
Yeah, I mean that's also the case with some just organic language changes. But I don't really like that when this sort of thing is imposed from the top with this sort
Yes.
of moralistic enforcing of if you don't use this correct term, then you're a horrible person, you're a racist or sexist or whatever it is that you're being
Hmm.
accused today.
Yeah, and the English speakers may not understand, but most of us on the planet do. We usually have an academy that technically enforces the language. So you sometimes have some dictates from a bunch of bureaucrats that say, "Oh no, from now on we're going to say this." And although, of course, you can break them, there are no legal penalties from doing that. But as Jon said, you can be socially sanctioned sometimes. Whatever. Let's go to the next
But
one.
I mean, it's really good news that this a piece like that is being
In the
published
Huffington
on
Post.
Huffington Post, um, and also almost all the comments are in favor of this author.
Hmm.
There's a handful of negative comments, but something like 90% are positive.
Hmm. 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 Yeah, that's good. I mean, NetGod is saying in the NetGod is our resident conservative Christian. He says Ariana Huffington is actually a Christian, not your typical godless liberal. But the site does skew left in the English language, not just in the US, because in the UK is the same, and because that's how most journalists and public intellectuals are. So it may actually be. I don't know if it is true, but it probably is. Maybe that is why we have this impression that HuffPo is usually very posh and politically correct and whatnot. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, I was reading at once some articles on Huffington Post India, and I was thinking, well, some of these would never be published in in HuffPo UK or HuffPo Canada, especially not HuffPo Canada. So maybe there is actually a lot more editorial autonomy than we previously suspected.
It sort of seems to me that the German version of HuffPo is not as sort of ideologically progressive. Though I say that on a very limited sample. I don't usually read the HuffPo in either language, so
Hmm.
take it with a
I
grain
see.
of salt.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Let's go to the
Okay,
next
the
one.
next one is from the Telegraph from the UK. Protein World is back with a new body shaming ad, and it's more sexist than ever. Picture the scene: a dance soundtrack begins as a series of tanned, toned women in bikinis appear on screen. They waggle their tongues at the camera, growl at the lens provocatively, wipe sand from their bum cheeks, and gyrate while wearing only headphones and a black cutout two-piece. In fact, only a couple of the women aren't in swimwear. But fear not, they're still showing plenty of flesh in crop tops and hot pants. Hang on, and did one of them just suggestively lick an ice lolly? No, this isn't Robin Thicke's newest music video, though you'd be forgiven for making the mistake. Welcome to the latest advert by Protein World. If you think the name sounds familiar, you'd be right. The self-proclaimed premium online health store was responsible for one of the biggest advertising gaffes or triumphs, depending on your opinion, of 2015. Its "Are you Beachbody Ready" billboards, which showed a woman in a skimpy bikini, legs akimbo, sparked widespread controversy last summer, with campaigners accusing them of body shaming and being sexist. An online petition removed the posters. Uh, an online petition to remove the posters gathered more than 70,000 signatures, while feminists defaced posters on London's Tube network. The Advertising Standards Authority (ASA) eventually banned the ads from returning to the underground and launched an investigation into whether they were socially responsible, eventually deciding they weren't offensive. Nonetheless, Campaign magazine recently named it as the worst advertisement of last year. Now Protein World is back. Its latest slogan, "New Year, New You," is perhaps the least offensive thing about a new TV commercial, which I saw last night during the ad breaks between Legally Blonde on Channel 5. There I was sitting comfortably on the sofa in my Christmas jumper, a final festive fling before the big return to work, eating chocolate and watching a film that encourages women to unashamedly be themselves when, bam, I was smacked in the face by something that, at first glance, looked like soft porn. It made my heart sink. Twitter agreed. Another critic wrote, yeah, if Twitter agrees, then obviously it's a open and shut case. Another critic wrote on Protein World's Facebook page, "We haven't forgotten that hideous advert you had on the tube inviting all women to comply to the subjective standards what you thought was a beach body." I thought of the ad again this morning when I read about a new study by Weight Watchers. They asked 2,000 women about being kind to themselves and found that the average woman criticizes herself 8 times a day. 1 in 7 chastises themselves throughout the whole day, every day. Is that a lot? Is that little? How does it compare to men? I don't know. Maybe that's a question we should be asking, but no. Let's move on. That's 8 is obviously a big number, and that's it. Okay, moving on. Little wonder when the message we're being slapped with is that the new year requires a new you. One new look at Victoria's Secret's model and crab walk on the beach while wearing a flawless white swimsuit. Ads like this fly in the face of successful campaigns such as "This Girl Can", Sport England's initiative, launched a year ago this month, aimed to encourage women and girls to take up sport, but telling it like it is. Cue sweating, jiggling, huffing and puffing, real women doing sport and loving it. This wasn't about how they looked, but how they felt. The videos are watched 37 million times on social media and have been credited with helping 148,700 women participate in sports so far, and there wasn't a pert bottom in sight. This is what women really want: honesty, not perfection. We don't want to be shamed while sitting on our sofas. We want to be inspired by something we can realistically achieve. And we want ads that speak to us, not to the men we're supposedly trying to impress with our newly toned abs. Why does Protein World still not get it? Women's Health does. The magazine recently announced that its New Year's resolution was to ditch the phrases "bikini body" and "drop two dress sizes." Editor Amy Keller-Laird explained in an open letter, "Since our goal is always to pump you up and never to make you feel bad, here's our pledge. They're gone. They no longer appear on women's health covers." It's a significant step forward in helping women feel good about their bodies and motivated, rather than scared, to hit the gym, road, or sports field. But while ads such as that by Protein World are still flashing before our eyes on TV screens, we stand little chance of squashing body shaming for good and convincing young girls that wearing a bikini isn't the only reason to be healthy. And we can't top the silence that critical inner voice that tells us we're too fat and don't do enough exercise up to 8 times a day. Ah.
That's my only comment. I mean, no, I'm glad that Protein World is doing this. No, seriously, I'm glad. I mean, absolutely fantastic. Good job. I might as well buy some of their products, even if I don't need them, just to encourage them to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep pushing and keep ridiculing the fat acceptance and all the collective of social justice warriors. And come on, why does Protein World still not get it? Well, they do get it. That's why they made a crap ton of money based on your outrage on their last quote-unquote offensive ad campaign.
Yeah, and
So now you're doing the same thing, and they will get it again, namely the profits that they'll make off of your outrage.
yeah, and who appointed you the spokeswoman of all women everywhere? This
Yeah.
is what women really want: honesty, not perfection. She says, representing all the 3 point something billion women in the world, because obviously they
Yes.
speak with one voice.
Yes, and given that the Protein World is an online store, they essentially have as a potential client, I don't know, all women who have an internet connection. That would be like 2 billion women. Uh, so, who the hell are you to speak for 2 billion potential customers? Now, I'm not saying that all of 2 billion will be their customers, but still.
Yeah,
And music.
I
No,
mean,
the only. Go ahead, please.
I did watch this horrible assault on women everywhere, and it's like this ad that's like 17 seconds or something, and yeah, I mean it shows some attractive women wearing skimpy clothes and so on, but yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I,
but it's
it just
offensive to do that.
it just really amazes me how people take that sort of thing so seriously. It's just a fucking ad. I mean, get over it. He was watching this ad for a quarter of a minute and somehow your whole evening is ruined or something. I just don't get it.
Ads on TV. Or maybe you shouldn't watch TV, period.
Yeah, I mean,
Seriously, if this is the biggest offense that an online store is having an ad that shows, depicts whatever, several attractive women. I mean, if this is the biggest problem, then I would say this world is absolutely fantastic.
yeah, I mean, I'm not intimately familiar with the protein world, but I guess they're sort of selling products that are not aimed at sort of the average woman who um, does some exercising once a week or something, but people who are seriously into getting healthy and you know lifting weights and doing all kinds of more serious sports, and who are willing to buy these kinds of protein supplements and what have you. And
Yeah, that's
th-
pretty much a fair assessment.
and the audience for them is not the random fatty on Twitter. It's just not.
True
And
story.
and and if these people get offended, Protein Bot doesn't care because they're not their customers.
Yeah, they're not their customers, and very unlikely for them to ever become even potential customers. And also they already have experience from their past shitstorm that if they say nothing, or at least, or and eventually they just say no, we refuse to apologize, I think we did nothing wrong and we stand by our ad like they did last time, they made the estimate profits were like $2 million, uh, only from that controversy alone. And they invested 200,000 of that money just to put a huge banner in the center of New York, and it was like middle finger to all the social justice warriors. Fuck you all. We're gonna do what we want to do, and you can do nothing to stop it. I just love it. I hope they continue to do this forever.
And
As I
that's
said, I'm
exactly the right attitude, and that's the
yes,
attitude you have to take. Because
yes.
if you issue a groveling apology, that's not going to help you.
It's
People are,
never enough.
it's, if you give in and sort of and even ask them for suggestions or whatever, they're never going to be satisfied.
Yes, it's never enough with the social justice warriors. That's why nobody should ever apologize in any way, shape, or form to the social justice warriors. The appropriate answer is, so what? Fuck you. That's it. And the Protein World is the first company to actually do that, to actually put that into practice, to come out and say, no, we're not going to apologize. We stand by our ad. Our clients liked it, and we think it's a very good ad, and it transmits exactly the message we want to transmit. And as a result, 1 week later, they just erected a huge ad exactly like that, like the one in London, except the one in London was like an A4 format. It was minuscule, whilst the other one was the size of a building, of a 20-story building. And we're gonna put a bigger one. Maybe you didn't see it correctly when it was small. That's precisely the attitude that one should have. Every company should do this. Every time, when there was recently some social justice wankers were whining that IBM isn't doing enough to fight sexism. If I were IBM, I would put a huge ad with an all-white men team smiling and said, "Welcome to IBM." That's what I would do, and I'm not joking. I mean, that's what you have to do when these weenies come out of the woodwork and start complaining. And I don't like that the Telegraph is willing to publish this drivel. They should pretty much remove all this drivel. All these authors that they're writing about the ads that they've seen whilst they were watching on sofas and bullshit soap opera, pretty much a Sex and the City spin-off, essentially. No, that's not news.
Yeah, though I think that protein world is sort of in a somewhat unusual position because they have this particular clientele, who are, I think, much less likely to be feminist, or at least if they are feminists, not in the type of fat acceptance stuff and so
Mm-hmm.
on.
Mm-hmm.
I really know this kind of culture pretty well because my brother is seriously into bodybuilding, so
Mm-hmm.
I sort of know how these kinds of people work to a certain extent, and I think this sort of thing is exactly the right message, and trying to appeal to some sort of you know all types of bodies are okay and so on is not how you sell your protein supplements or whatever. It's just not how it works.
Yeah, I mean, people get into bodybuilding precisely because they don't believe that all types of bodies are okay, just only certain of them if they're worked enough.
Yeah, just because they want to have a body that is
Yes,
superior,
yes.
and
And but then
and
again, the idea of a superior body is offensive.
no one goes to the gym 5 times a week to have a different body type that's equal to all other body types. No, you go to the gym that often because you believe that having a particular body shape is better.
Yes. Yeah, I'm telling you, this is the only satisfaction that I'm drawing from this controversy. The fact that they don't stop. Not only they bitch slap the SJWs hard last time, they're willing to do it again. And they don't apologize. They just let them squirm and whine and whatnot, and then they'll probably next week or 2 weeks from now they'll come out with a small communique to say no, we're not going to apologize. It's a very good ad, and then they'll probably air it on CNN or something if they make enough profits. I'm pretty sure that's how they do it, because that's what they did last time, and there's no reason that they won't do it again. Uh, and that's a very good thing. I mean, maybe it inspires other companies as well to start pushing back and to not just be reactionary or reactive whenever the SJWs complain, to just say fuck off. No. Go proactive against them. Well, after you say fuck off, just put a bigger ad, a more offensive ad. There you go. Yeah, go ahead, start squirming. It's
I mean,
funny.
not necessarily more offensive because what they've done here with the protein world, with this and also with the previous ad, is that they have a sort of a defensible position because it's not an ad that is sexist or uh, or that really shames fat people or anything. No, it just sort of celebrates being skinny and attractive and in shape and so on. It's so it's a position that I think most sort of ordinary, reasonable people would accept and not find outrageous. Whereas if you have something that is genuinely outrageous to the average person, then it's not necessarily a good strategy to just stand by that, come what may.
Yeah, but then again, I mean, the SJWs are so easy to offend that putting up an offensive ad to SJWs isn't really complicated at all.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You have to. It's a good strategy to put something in that offends the unreasonable SJWs, but which normal people will look on as pretty inoffensive and as no big deal, which of course it isn't. But yeah, I mean, this way you can generate lots of attention for your brand while still not alienating the average consumer.
I mean, before the controversy issued by the fat feminists last time, uh, nobody outside of the tiny subsector of the bodybuilding community ever heard of them. Now their brand is pretty much well known. I mean, even this feminist assumes that everyone knows what Protein World is.
Yeah. I mean,
Which for a tiny online store, that's fabulous.
yeah. I mean, if they had put up an ad saying something like, I don't know, fatty suck or something,
Yeah, yeah,
then that would have been a disaster, of course.
yeah,
It
absolutely.
would have pissed off the feminists and so on, but it would also piss off regular normal people, with good reason. But the way they framed it is I think perfect. It's sort of infuriating to this kind of fat acceptance people, but it's just sort of more just a thing that normal people will accept, and in that sense, it's perfect.
Okay, let's go to the last one, also from the silly place, from uk.complex.com. I have to admit I have never heard of this website until now. Women are destroying men on Twitter with hashtag waste his time 2016. Women are not playing this year, at least not the ones using hashtag waste his time 2016 on Twitter today. The trending hashtag has women devising some savagely evil ways to waste a man's time, break his spirit, and basically, according to some women, do what dirtbag men have been doing to women for years, decades, and centuries. As Redditor Turned Down for What put it, here it is, gentlemen, the emphatical proof that yes, they know what they're doing, and no, they don't give a fiddler's fuck. Here's a taste. At Cyrene whatever says finally allow him to take you on a date, then after have him drop you off at your other man's house. Hashtag waste his time 2016. Jessica Lalia, I think is to pronounce it, says tell him you're not looking for anything serious, then get in a relationship the next week with someone else. Hashtag waste his time 2016. Aspen Share, whatever. Hang out with him all day, and then when you get home, tweet, damn, today was hella boring. Hashtag waste his time 2016. One Chelsea. Tell him to come over, then fall asleep and don't answer the I'm here text. Waste his time 2016. Miss Parisi or something. Leave his messages unread for a week, then finally text him back that tell him you was asleep the whole time. Waste his time 2016. Zaibun Valley, whatever. Wait until he catches feelings and then ask him if his best friend is single. Hashtag waste his time 2016. Another two, Nikki and Co. Ask him if he's good with his hands. Then when he comes over, make him put together that IKEA furniture. Hashtag waste his time 2016. Okay, that's funny. Underscore SYN, sincerely written with Y. He's your baby in the messages, but when he walks up to you in person, introduce him as your friend. Hashtag waste his time 2016. Now, there are different ways to rephrase the hashtag, but I guess the proper way I would do it would be hashtag I'm 14 and dumb, or I'm mentally 14 and dumb. I mean, seriously, some of these are worthy of horny but undecized 14-year-old girls. I mean, it's appropriate at that age. Not so much appropriate at 20 or 30 or even older. I mean, I've seen some of these tweets come from women that are 35 or 40. And I'm like, seriously, how old are you? Haven't you grown up since puberty, like at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to take this whole thing. Maybe it's supposed to be an attempt at humor but I don't know. I mean, some of these are admittedly funny, but most of them are just kind of mean, and I don't really see where the humor is supposed to lie if it is indeed meant to be funny. I don't know.
I don't suspect these guys. I mean, some of these accounts, you'll notice some of them are, verified accounts. I mean, just to have that kind of account costs like $25,000. So these are definitely not your average teenage girls posting mean things on Twitter. These are people who pay to have their image recognized on Twitter, and they pay good money. In some parts of the world, you can buy 2 apartments with that money, and then they use it to post and to promote these kinds of things that are not just mean, but childish. And some of these things are things that remind me of when I was 13 or 14. They make sense at that time, but they no longer make sense once you pass the age of majority or even 16.
Yeah, it's just rather silly on the whole.
Yeah. On the other hand, I was watching Captain Capitalism's analysis over this hashtag, and he made a very good point on his channel. He said, uh, instead of getting angry, young men should just look at those tweets and just say, well, learn a thing or two about them and learn that there are very mean-spirited cunts out there, and learn how to get the false flags and avoid them. Sorry, the red flags, I meant. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it can be used as an educational experiment for young boys and young men.
Yeah, definitely.
Other than that, I don't know what to say about. I mean, some of them, again, some of them are just so childish that I'm like, how do I comment on this? I mean, it's just stupid, and that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Before closing down, CYR placed another link in the chat room from Vice. Apparently, there's a rape culture in Germany. Winning? No. If you can see the chat room, I can't read it now, but yeah. I guess until next week, there will probably be another 100,000 articles written by the about the incidents, not just in Germany but also in other European cities, and we'll probably,
Something like that, probably.
yeah, and we'll probably have to come back to this topic. Hopefully, Jessica Valenti will chip in on the incident. So at least we'll have some good laughs, because other than laughing, I mean, I don't know how to say it. I mean, people from within her circles, they insist that she's serious whenever she writes stuff, at least in her Guardian column. But I find that hard to believe. I mean, most of her articles are just downright funny. Yeah. All right. I think that's pretty much enough for this week. I don't have anything more to say.
I
Do
do have
you?
I do have one more suggestion, which is to take the red pill.
Yep. Take the red pill, everyone. Goodbye, and see you all next week.